person, Charlene, in our studios here in Hong Kong. First, I want to talk about contagion, possibly from the Greek debt crisis, because your other colleagues in the U.S. were talking about American lenders and what exposure they have to European banks who then have the exposure to Greece. So what about Chinese lenders? Any possibility there?
In terms of direct exposure, it should be extremely small.
Yeah.
If you look at the foreign currency portfolios of these banks, it's usually in the single digits, so quite small and mainly in the U.S.
Yeah.
So to a country as small as Greece, it's going to be pretty minimal. I think the bigger issue is what about the fallout in terms of broader issues, macro issues with regard to growth in Europe or spillover into other sectors that would then impact the Chinese economy.
Yeah, well, let's talk about, I guess, first macro, the macro outlook on China, then we'll specifically highlight the lenders, because Fitch is on a negative outlook, I believe,
yes,
on the Chinese
local currency.
On the
rating.
local currency, yeah, sovereign, the China sovereign ratings. But how does that translate over to the banks when, I guess, your outlook on growth in China, I assume, has some negative effects?
We have recently, the sovereign team downgraded the growth outlook for China to the mid-8 percentile range. Generally speaking, the reason we didn't move on the banks is because we expect the Chinese sovereign to step in and support the banks, and therefore it becomes a sovereign creditworthiness issue rather than a bank creditworthiness issue. But beyond that, we are quite concerned about a pretty big problem with bad debt over the next few years associated with local governments, property, and all of the excesses that have built up since the stimulus in 2008.
Are we beginning to see some of that poke through, or is it still fairly well hidden in the balance sheets?
Yeah, there's a lot of anecdotal stories about local governments, developers running into funding issues already this year, but so far they seem to be able to get through these problems. But this is only going to increase through the rest of this year and into next year.
But how serious is the issue? I mean, you've heard very bearish calls where the banks are going to drag down the economy, and we're talking about an implosion, treadmill to hell. You know, Jim Chanos famously used that term.
Yeah.
Is it that severe?
It has the potential to get that severe, yes. Ultimately, it's all going to depend on the government's response to this and how proactive or reactive they are.
Right.
But yes, there is enough reason to be worried. If you look at the list of reasons for crises in different countries, almost all of these are present in China at the current moment.
Give me an example, like what?
In terms of overlending, problems with the underlying financial infrastructure with regard to accounting, legal issues. We've got thin capital and resources on hand, state-owned banks lending to state-owned companies, a lot of government interference in the process, and the list goes on and on.
Okay. Wow.